Ďakujeme predovšetkým nadácii Konrad Adenauer Stiftung a Via Kultúra a ďalej našim mediálnym partnerom a ďalším partnerom, ktorí prispeli k organizácii tohto festivalu. Dnešným podujatím nás bude sprevádzať šarmantná mladá dáma Agata Drelová. Absolvovala štúdium politických vied summa cum laude a postgraduálne štúdium stredoeurópskych a východoeurópskych štúdií na Univerzite Sant'Egidiu. Venuje sa prepojeniu náboženského aktivizmu a nacionalizmu v socialistickom a postsocialistickom Československu. Vyučuje historiografiu na Univerzite v Exeteri. Veľmi pekne ďakujem, že som mohol takto krátko sa k vám prihovoriť. Dovolte mi teraz odozdať slovo Agate a ďalej budeme pokračovať v anglickom jazyku.
Ďakujem, Jozef. And as you've said, we shall continue in English. Let me introduce guest tonight, short biography. Leonardo Embertiho Gialloretiho is a medical doctor. He's a university professor and a researcher. He works in the field of neurology and epidemiology at the University in Rome. And in his research, he looks at autism, among other things as well. Leonardo joined the Sant'Egidio community in Rome as a high school student over 30 years ago. And in the community, Leonardo's focus is on ecumenical and interreligious dialogue. He's one of the organizers of the Prayer for Peace meeting, which was originally started by John Paul II. And he also works in peace negotiations. He helps facilitate peace talks in Mozambique, for instance. He also works in peace negotiations and prevention and cure of AIDS in Africa. Currently, he's coordinator of humanitarian help for countries affected by the Islamic State occupation. Tonight, we're going to talk about your work at the Sant'Egidio community, and also more generally about the community, its mission, its work, its vision, and I suppose that all that will connect in one unifying theme, which is people on periphery, which is working on frontiers, working with people on periphery, on the edge, and among other things we'll mention peacemaking, homeless people, refugees. And I must say that when I read the topics for tonight, I was thinking, where am I going to start? These are all very relevant issues, and then I read a bit more about your community, and I found out that the founder is a historian, and he has this very interesting thought, which says that a very good way of learning about a society, of knowing a society, is to learn its history. So I was thinking that we would start there with the history of your movement. And so the movement was started in Rome in 1968. Now, we all know that early 1960s was a time of Second Vatican Council. But if you say youth in Western Europe in 1968, I suppose most of us would think things like hippies, or probably street barricades in Paris, neo-Marxists protesting in the streets. But I suppose that that's not the whole picture, is it? And I think that Sant'Egidio is a very important part of that story, of the story of the 1960s. And I wonder if you could tell us more about that, about the connection that Sant'Egidio has with these developments in the 1960s, how it was started, and what it does today as well. Perhaps we'll talk about that more later.
When we speak about 68, we should also not forget 1968 in Czechoslovakia, which in a different way was part of, I would say, of a dream that the world can change. And Obviously, in Czechoslovakia, it took different shapes than in Western Europe. In Western Europe, it was a time of hippies, sure. I'm not the ideal person to speak about hippies because my hairs are not ideal for hippies, but maybe at that time, when I was younger, I had some more hairs, I could be a little bit more hippie. But there was in all Western Europe an idea going around a society, which was the idea of not accepting the world as it is. Something has to change. But what happened with this idea? That very often the young generation who had a wish to change the world, felt that somebody else had to change. What does it mean? Very often the idea was, I am on the right side of the world. The others are wrong. The others might be the capitalists, might be the Marxists, might be whatever. But somebody else is guilty because this world is not working. In our experience, the same dream to change the world met with something different. Met, in our experience, with the Word of God, with the Bible. And from the Bible, we understood that if I want to change the world, I cannot accuse somebody else. I have to start to change myself. Because if the world is wrong, it is also because of me. It is not only because of somebody else. And we, reading the Bible, we understood that the first question was a question to myself. I have to change the world by beginning to change myself. But what does it mean to change myself? It's a philosophical question. For us, this question was not philosophical. It was very concrete. To change myself meant for us to change the places where we usually were going around. For example, to change myself meant for us to begin to go to the peripheries of our city, Rome, that were places where usually secondary school students like us did not go. So this was the first change in life, a very concrete change. And what happened when we began to change, I would say, our geography? Instead of only moving from house to school, to my swimming pool, to my tennis, or whatever, I began to move to some other places. To move to some other places meant to meet people who were different from me, who were not the people that I met every day at school. So, the beginning of changing myself began through the meeting of other people, meeting persons. The people that we met in the periphery were people in need, were poor people living in shanty towns. You should imagine in 1968, and immediately afterwards, in Rome, which had 2.5 million inhabitants, we had 500,000 people, 500,000 people living in slums. Today the situation has changed a bit. But at that time, 500,000 people in Rome were living in slums. But these people, even if they were living in Rome, were somehow outside the city. So they did not belong to the city. So what we did by going there was to build a bridge between people who did not meet before. They were poor people. We wanted somehow to help these people. But we understood that the first way to help anyone is to meet. Meeting is the first step of helping. Sometimes we Christians, we speak about helping the others. But helping without meeting sometimes does not lead to a real help. So this was the first step for us to be involved in this dream of changing the society, starting from ourselves.
And I suppose that's where my next question is. In your vision, you talk quite a lot about friendship, about relationships, and as being basically the starting point of your strategy. And I must say, at least for myself, walking past homeless people and seeing them and thinking that, I suppose with the prejudice that all they want is perhaps, my material help. I suppose it can be quite easy to think that you cannot really start sort of mutually equal relationship. Is that so? I mean, your work of course shows that it's not the case, and I've heard from people who work with homeless people that often you find out that they give you more than you can give to them. So I'd like to hear more about this, about really relationships, and what's the place of them in your work, and how does it work really to start a relationship with a homeless person, with a poor person? When you started, you were people from, I suppose, quite well-off families in Rome, so you were from an entirely different environment. So how was it for you?
There is one former General Secretary of the United Nations, Dr. Hammarskjöld, a Swede, who was General Secretary for many years of the United Nations, and once he was asked, what is the most important thing in your job as General Secretary of the United Nations? And he said, to sit down on the floor and meet people. So I think meeting people means, first of all, to meet a person. And when you meet a person, you learn immediately not to look at the surface. Because what divides me from a homeless person that I meet on the street is the surface. It's not the core. Meeting means to accept, to go over the surface. And then you see that you are much more similar than you expect.
Thank you very much. I suppose I'd like to ask a bit more about the other different peripheries that you work at. You of course don't only help homeless people, but you also help those whom you call, the new poor of Europe, which are the elderly people. And I suppose you also help to other groups, to the immigrants, who I think that are basically those who perhaps need our help as well a lot, especially these days. Could you tell us a bit more about people from different sorts of peripheries that you work with?
You were mentioning the elderly people. This is a huge challenge and question for all our European societies. Because everybody of us becomes old. We hope. The only way not to become old is to die before. So we hope to become old. That means that this periphery of being old, of being frail, of being sick, is a periphery which is inside each one of us. So each one of us can be in a certain moment of his or her life part of a periphery. And for this reason, probably, as this frailty of the elderly is inside each one of us, maybe for this reason we are afraid of that. And we put it apart. And that's why elderly people are very often put apart in institutions. It's a way of hiding these peripheral aspect of life, which is inside each one of us. But our European societies should reflect very deeply about the elderly. Because thanks to medicine and thanks to the development of the last century, we have prolonged the life. So we live much longer than before. But the question is that we have prolonged the life, but we were not able until now to give a meaning to this longer life. The life is longer, but which is the meaning of a life of a person with Alzheimer? Is this person only somebody who has to be put apart? Or can this person with Alzheimer play a role in our society by giving to our society a new understanding, a new meaning?
During my research, I've done several dozens of oral history interviews, and they were typically with elderly people. And I often found myself listening to them for more than 4 hours, and because these were people that had no one else, and they felt that they had so much to say. And there's a lot of wisdom, I suppose, as well in what they say. And as you're talking about how we could integrate all elderly people into the society, I'm thinking that we're probably not really using this wisdom that they can tell us. Of course, not all of them are capable of are no longer healthy enough to do that. But are you doing anything in that direction as well? I don't know, maybe integrating them really with the younger people, and so that we can use what they have to tell us as well.
I strongly believe that in the elderly people there is a great wisdom that we need to rediscover. But the wisdom of the elderly people today is very different from the wisdom of the elderly people in 100 years ago. 100 years ago, there were very few elderly people in our society. And usually these few elderly people were in good health, because if they were not in good health, they would have been dead. Today, we have many more elderly people, not always in good health, and also not always in good health in terms of mind. So what does it mean, wisdom today? The wisdom of the elderly. In the past, in a society which was mainly rural society, where not many people were able to write, the elderly people represented the memory of the society. They could transmit to the other generations the information. When to plant a seed, when to take, and so on. So this was the wisdom of the elderly. But today, each one of us, theoretically, does not need an old person for the wisdom. You go on internet and you find all the information you need, theoretically. And today, the old people seem to be outdated. They are not able to use the iPad. They are not able to use their iPhone. And so on. They cannot use home banking. So they are outdated. So what does it mean, a wisdom of the elderly? I think, on the other side, I think that there is a great wisdom, which is not the wisdom of transmitting information, but which is the wisdom of transmitting the real and deep meaning of life. To transmit that the real meaning of life is not in my strength, is not in my well-being, but is in my being frail, is in my being weak. And because of my weakness, I need the others. This is what the elderly people tell us. Each one of us needs the others. The elderly people need others to continue to live, especially they are sick. But in fact, each one of us needs the others. And if we learn it when we are young, we will be much more happy when we will be old.
Thank you. Talking about meaning and value of human life, in recent days we've seen really very disturbing pictures of boats packed with immigrants being drowned in the Mediterranean Sea, and I suppose some of us are still able to debate whether we should accept immigrants, because I suppose that we're afraid that they're of a different culture, and we're afraid of all these differences, and I don't know, I suppose, what does it tell us about Europe if that happens? Could you tell us more about Sant'Egidio's work with the immigrants?
This tragedy which happened in the Mediterranean is unfortunately somehow a consequence of years of smaller tragedies which did not lead to a reaction of Europe. I was speaking yesterday by phone with a friend of mine, and he said, in this boat 950 people died. And he said, if in this boat, instead of 950 people, there had been 950 million euros, Europe would have reacted much more quickly and would have saved the boat.
That would be a rule.
Yeah. And so I think that this tragedy is something which calls Europe to ask herself, what does it mean to be European? What does it mean to be European if you look at a world around you which is war, where people are killed, where children are killed, where women are killed, and what do? I mean, this is a question. I am not saying that there is an easy answer to that. I'm not saying this. Because the answer to what is happening is complex, it's complicated, it's not easy, I know. But how is it possible not to react to what is happening in the Mediterranean, not only now, but throughout the years? About 22,000 people died in the Mediterranean in these last 10 years. Every day somebody is dying. So I think this brings us to the question, what does it mean to be Europeans? Obviously, many people are coming to Europe. But these people, the majority of these people who are coming, they are fleeing. They are fleeing from war. During before 1989, when Europe was divided, the people who were fleeing from Central or Eastern Europe and who were coming to Western Europe were automatically recognized as refugees. Because it was clear that they were fleeing from something which was unbearable for them. The same spirit is not there today. Even if people are fleeing from awful situations.
What do you think?
Why do I think? I think that Europe is living in a time, we as Europeans are experiencing a time of great fear. We are afraid from what is outside. And we think that in order to solve this fear, or to overcome this fear, we should close ourselves inside.
I suppose the same thing. I suppose that the same thing happens in the church as well, doesn't it? In a parallel way, that we think that, you know, could you tell us a bit more about what the Catholics, perhaps, how the Catholics perceive that, or Christians as well?
I mean, it's an important message which came from the church is that when Pope Francis was elected Pope, his first trip immediately after his election was done to Lampedusa, to a small island in the southern of Italy where the majority of refugees arrive because it's very close to Tunisia. It's 40 kilometers from Tunisia. His first trip was to go there. I think that's a beginning of a change also inside the Catholic Church. And I think that has been a very important sign for a church which sometimes has been more European than Christian?
Thank you. Talking about immigrants, some of them are Christians, but most of them, as far as I know, would be of different confession, of different religion, and I wonder what does that mean for Europe. I suppose that inter-religious dialogue would be very much needed, and Sant'Egidio therefore as well. So I wonder if you could tell us more about what does it mean, what accepting these immigrants means for our understanding of other religions, and then if you could talk more generally about the work of your community in the field of inter-religious dialogue.
First thing, we should look at the numbers. Last year arrived in Europe around 200,000 refugees from the Mediterranean. 200,000 refugees is a large number. But if we look at how many refugees went to Lebanon, for example, from Syria to Lebanon, 2 million. How many refugees went from Syria or from southern Iraq to North Iraq, in Kurdistan? 2.5 million. So, I mean, Europe is receiving numbers, but not so big as others. So this has to be said. I mean, Lebanon is a country of 4 million inhabitants, and it has 2 million refugees today. So it's like in Slovakia, 2.5 million, as if Slovakia would have 2.5 million refugees. So, I mean, let's first of all see the numbers in the right perspective. Then, there is a fear, another fear in Europe, that many Muslims are arriving. They will reshape Europe somehow. First of all, we should say that the majority of Muslims who are living now in Europe, for example in France or in England, are already Europeans. I mean, they came before, in our generations. Now they are French people, they are English people. But obviously, the fact that Muslims are present in Europe is a question. I don't want to say that this is not an open question for us. But the problem is that are the Muslims who arrive the reason for destroying the European identity? Or we Europeans risk to destroy the European identity because we have not clear which is our identity? I mean, we are afraid from newcomers, maybe because our own identity is not so clear. This is the problem. And then, I mean, if I look at Italy, in Italy we had 10 years ago about 2 million foreigners living in Italy. Now we have 5.5 million. So the number increased very much. But the majority of the newcomers to Italy are not Muslims. They are Christians. They are coming from Romania, Christian Orthodox. They are coming from Ukraine, Christian Orthodox or Catholics. They are coming from Poland. So I mean, it's we have a little bit to look at that. I finish by saying that sometimes ago I was talking with the Lutheran bishop of Berlin in Germany, the previous bishop, and he told something which is very wise. said, people are afraid that Muslims will destroy the Christian identity of Europe. But, he said, maybe we Christians are destroying our Christian identity in the moment in which we close the door in front of the others. Because a core aspect, a key aspect of a Christian identity is to have open doors. If you close the door, you are losing your Christian identity. Was his position. I agree with that.
Thank you. I'd love to talk about that more, but I'm afraid that we'll have to move on audience questions. So I'll have one last question, and then we'll move to audience questions. The work you do is about being, in a sense, in a constant state of vulnerability. Crossing frontiers, going out to people, and I suppose that maybe it is enriching, but it's also challenging, and an important part of the spirituality of your community is prayer. And I can see why it's necessary, but could you tell us a bit more about the role that prayer plays in the community? Prayer.
The first way to overcome borders is the prayer. Because through prayer, you can overcome all kinds of borders. And you can bring close to you, through the prayer, you can bring close to you those who are far. Through the prayer, you can bring close to you those countries which are far from you. I remember many years ago, during a visit to the Pope John Paul II, during this visit there was a lunch, and on the table cover was a flag of Lebanon. So we were eating on this flag. And then somebody asked, but it's a strange cover for a table. And he said, yes, because in this way I always remember Lebanon. I don't forget it. And so that I can remember Lebanon and bring Lebanon into my prayers. So prayer is the beginning of breaking the borders. Prayer, first of all, is breaking the border between earth and sky. But then it is breaking the borders with all those who are outside the borders created by man. And this is an important, and by the way, we are Catholics, we are a Catholic community, and Catholic as such means universal. And one of the titles of the Pope is Pontifex. It's a title taken from the Roman history. Pontifex. That means pontes facere, building bridges. So the role of the Pope is to be pontifex, to build bridges between people, between countries.
Thank you. So we'll take the first question.
I heard that your activity are also on the areas under Islamic State. If it's right, if you could say more about it.
Should be translated I would say, unfortunately, not inside the Islamic State, for obvious reasons. But the countries where the Islamic State is now present, that is mainly parts of Syria and parts of Iraq, are countries where our community has been deeply involved throughout the years, because we felt, even in the past years, we felt the responsibility to support, on one side, the Christians living there, the Christian minorities, and we were, throughout the years, trying to help to support the Christians. On the other side, these countries were countries where we were going on with an interreligious dialogue, with a dialogue with Islamic people. Because dialogue with Islamic people is also a way to protect the Christians. So we have been deeply involved in these countries through contacts, through humanitarian help, through the help of Christians who were fleeing these countries before. Today, with the creation of a so-called Islamic State, we are not able to work inside. We are working outside by helping, continuing to support with some projects the Christians in Kurdistan, where the majority of Christians from Iraq are now living, and by supporting the refugee camps in Lebanon and in Jordan. This is our main activity today.
I lived in France, and I saw there that their culture is not Christian at all. If we do not count like 5% Christians that are living there. And I want to ask if secular culture of Europe is really able to accommodate those refugees, and if we shouldn't focus more on the missionary evangelization of European Union, because I guess we do not have our culture. Europe is not Christian anymore.
Europe is a product of different cultures, of different backgrounds. Some countries stress, in some countries there is more stress on some aspect of the Illuministic culture. Some other countries are stressing more Christian backgrounds and so on. But Europe as such is a mixture of several cultures, and this is a richness. It's not something that we should be afraid about. Regarding the welcome of refugees, I'm not so sure if the problem is that the refugees are not accepted because secularization became stronger in Europe. I have found many people who are non-Christians who are very open, and sometimes even more open than Christians. So I think it's not so much a matter of secularization or not. It is a matter of understanding which is the role of Europe in today's world. What do we want Europe to be? This is the main question, according to me, today. Then, apart from that, there is a Christian. If I am a Christian, then I have to ask myself questions as a Christian, which go beyond the question of Europe, which touch my relation to each human person. After this tragedy in the Mediterranean, the same day in which the news of this tragedy arrived, last Sunday, when Pope Francis spoke on Sunday from the window to the people, he spoke about this tragedy, and he said, "These are people like us." It's strange that the Pope has to say, these people who are dying are people like us, like me, like you. Because it is obvious. But apparently it is not so obvious. So the Christian question is, do we recognize these people as people like me, like you? This is the Christian question today.
You've been talking very much about the difference between Europe and what Europe should do, or what is the European standpoint, and you know, facing all these problems in the Middle East. But my point of view, this problem is a little bit isolated because it's not just Europe; it's just the whole Western world. It's Europe, maybe Americas, those more influential countries in America. So my view on the situation is that is the Western world being a little bit numbed of all those problems and all the people dying. And as Pope Francis said, he had to remind that those people who died are exactly the same as we are. So my question is that if you feel the same, that maybe it's not just a problem of values, whether we are Christians or secular, that it's just problem of commitment. Do we care about those people? Do we care that there are 2 million, 3, 4? It's just a number. You know, we don't care. It's not just the clash of values. It's more a question of our commitment. If you feel the same about what is the Western world reacting towards the activities and Middle East, maybe other parts of the world, but they also feel tragedies and famine and war, etc.
I totally agree with you. I believe there is a wider responsibility of the Western world as such. I was focusing on Europe, but you're right. The Western world is not only Europe; it's much larger. Maybe I can add one thing to what you are saying by adding that it is not only the responsibility of the Western world. It is also the responsibility of the countries which are at war, because there is a huge responsibility of the people who are running, who have been running the countries, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Syria itself, and so on and so on. There is a great responsibility also of these people about the situation. So we should not only say that everything, all the problems of the world depend on us or on the West. They have also their own big responsibility. Very rich countries like Saudi Arabia have not used this richness for the people. Extremely rich countries like Libya, they have not used this richness for the people. And what we see, why so many people from Libya go to fight with ISIS. These are the consequences of this misuse and this misruling at local level. So I agree with what you are saying, and I even enlarge what you are saying by saying that there are many other responsibilities which are not only European or Western responsibility. At the same time, we cannot simply say they are responsible, so they should solve their problems by themselves. somebody in the back.
I would like to ask, according to you, how should European immigration policy look like? If you could say more concrete things, or what should Slovak Republic do?
Sorry, I didn't catch. I didn't see. I have not an answer to everything, but I think that Europe is coordinating inside the European Union. We are coordinating a lot of things. The plugs that we use are coordinated with the European Union. The bananas which arrive to Europe are coordinated at European Union level, and many other things. So the European Union is taking care about a lot of things, correctly, rightly so. But how is it possible that there is no coordination regarding refugee policy? I give you an example. We are still living in, regarding refugee policy in Europe, we are still living under one rule, one law, which says that if a refugee arrives in one European country, this refugee has to stay there, cannot move, cannot apply to go to another European country. Okay? What does it mean that? That, for example, Malta, which is a small island, but Malta is also a country, Malta is not helping the refugees on the sea, because they say, if we bring the people on our island, they will stay here. They cannot move to other European countries. So we will not save them, because otherwise there will be too much in our small country, in our small island. If there could be some kind of agreement that the refugees who arrive to Italy, to Malta, or to the other places, or through our ways, if these refugees could be welcomed according to quotas in different countries, I think this would be a first step to give a concrete answer to this situation. So, Germany is larger than Slovakia. The quota in Germany should be larger than the quota in Slovakia. I mean, this could be agreed upon. And we have seen that the main problems with the presence of refugees begin when large number of refugees are together. If they are divided in small groups, much less problems come up. So this could be something concrete that Europe could do, but obviously all the European countries should be ready to open their borders, for example, to welcoming a certain number of people. So this is something concrete which could be easily done and easily coordinated at European level. A second thing, Italy began 1 year ago, created a mission which was called Mare Nostrum, our sea, which saved a lot of lives on the sea. Then Italy asked Europe, the other European countries, to support financially and with military ships this mission, but Europe refused. So finally, Italy decided to stop this mission because it costed 9 million euros per month, and Italy said, the government said, we cannot sustain it. So this mission, which saved hundreds and hundreds of lives, is not working anymore. And we counted, it is true that it was expensive, 9 million euros per month. If all Europe could participate in that, it would be acceptable for all Europe. And you know how much each saved life costed? 600 euros. With 600 euros, we have saved one life of a person who did not die in the Mediterranean. Is one life not worth 600 euros? I mean, I think that this is a question that Europe should ask herself.
We'll take 2 more questions.
Here.
On the right. Okay, good evening. Thank you very much for your words. Okay, so from what you say, I understand that you, let's say, strongly recommend to meet with poor people and help them. Therefore, my question could sound a bit strange or maybe too simple. But I would like to ask if it is just the recommendation or if it is the must to meet with poor people for us as Christians or for us as Catholics. Because what I hear from our Pope, I understand it as something what is a must. But what I hear from people around me, like from my friends, or even I can sometimes make those excuses that I just meet with people from middle class, I work in a quite good job, I just don't meet these people and I don't need to meet them because I have enough people to help, you know. So my question is really simple. If it is something what we should do, or it is just something for somebody, it is just something for people who would like to work with Sant'Egidio or in those kind of organizations. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. It's a very interesting question. We should, for sure, I cannot give an answer in a few words, but with pleasure we can continue to talk about that later. But it is a must or not to meet with the poor. The Pope speaks, Pope Francis speaks very much about peripheral people. I mentioned before the elderly people, which is a periphery which is even inside ourselves. And I think that if I try to answer briefly to your question, I would say, what is a must as a Christian is to put in the center of your life not only yourself, but also others. Others can be poor people, can be your colleagues, can be all kind of people. But as Christians, we are called to go to others. The disciples of Jesus were listening to Jesus, and then they went to speak to others. And this is part of being a Christian, to meet others. We, in our community, we stress particularly the meeting with the poor. Why? Because we believe that if this is also my personal experience, if I learn to meet people who are very different from me, if I begin to have a relation with people who usually I would not meet, then I will begin to meet everybody. If I love those who are very different from me and who cannot give me something back because they are poor, then I will begin to love everybody, even the rich. And we Christians have this question, even the enemies. So, there is, I would not say it is a must to meet the poor. I would say it is a must to meet. And this is part of our faith, because our faith is receiving and giving, listening and speaking. This is part, the key aspect of our faith. But this is only a beginning of an answer.
Well, I guess maybe 2 points. Because I mean, this is a little bit like Christian dreaming about love, how to love the other people. But when we open borders, once we open them, it means that tens of millions of refugees will come here. And I'd like to know how to accommodate them, but in real terms, I mean, it's easy to say that we need one centralized institution, but actually we need more. The answer is more complicated, and actually, if we are ready to do it, and that's the first point. And the second point is, I do not believe that many cultures can live in one place together for a long time, because that will mean that we must have some common rules, and it will create tensions between them, and maybe we can end up in little wars here in Europe, because Muslims will not be able to accept Christians' points of view, Christians won't be able to accept, I don't know, secular point of views, etc. So what's your thought on it?
Regarding the first point, you say, if Europe opens the border, millions will come. But this is already happening in many other countries, because millions went to Jordan, millions went to North Iraq, millions went to Syria. So this already happened. The problem is that we simply don't see it. There are countries which are struggling under millions of people. If we open the border, maybe a little bit more people will come. I don't think millions will come, but a little bit more people than now. But the point is, why do people come? Because there is war. So the question is, what can Europe or Western countries or the other countries do to find a solution to wars. Because as long as wars will exist, people will flee. And you cannot stop them. You cannot stop them. Even the best castles during the Middle Ages, someday they have been overwhelmed. Even the highest walls have been overwhelmed. You cannot stop them. So the problem is to stop the reasons for leaving these countries. That's regarding the first point. And sorry, the second point I forget. Your second question?
Okay. Personally, I do not believe that it's possible to...
Yes, but different cultures can live together.
For a long time.
I mean, this should be a question more to a historian. Can countries which are different live together? I don't know. The point is, if we look at the 20th century, if we look at the history of the 20th century, where in Europe, for example, we had quite homogeneous nations. Germany was quite homogeneous, France was quite homogeneous, England was quite homogeneous, but nevertheless we had quite a lot of wars, even if the countries were very homogeneous. So
we had Christians fighting Christians.
We had Christians fighting Christians. And let's say that history tells us that nations, homogeneous nations, did not bring peace. So let's try something different. Maybe it can get better. We don't know.
Maybe if I can have one last question. I would like to ask you about the future, and then basically the future of the Near East and the Europe. Because what we see in the Near East is that Christian communities, and not even Christian communities, but all other minorities are almost erased from the map. The communities which were there for centuries are not at all there. They are not at all there anymore. And it looks like something really changed, and they are now only in the history, and there is no future for them. So my question is, what do you think about the future of the Near East? And the second part of the question, what do you think about the future of Christians in Europe? If you just, compare the future of those people from the Near East and of us.
So can I answer that question? I mean, is it really true? Is it really true that secularization is progressing in Europe? And I don't mean, of course, only that there are Muslims coming, but is it not that Christianity took on different forms, perhaps? That it's here, it's just changing?
So, regarding the Middle East, it is a matter of fact that the Middle East, which had been shaped after the First World War, is breaking down. All the countries created after the First World War, Syria, Iraq, are breaking down. I think that in the next years we will have a completely different Middle East as we have known it until now. Syria does not exist as a country anymore. Iraq does not exist as a country anymore. Yemen does not exist. I can suppose that Saudi Arabia will not exist as a country in some years. So the whole Middle East is being reshaped. And I think we cannot stop that. What we should try to do is to help this reshaping to be peaceful and not violent. In this reshaping of the Middle East, there are the Christians. exactly 1 century ago, the beginning of a keeping out of the Christians from the Middle East began. The 24th of April, that is after tomorrow, of 1950, the genocide of the Christians of Turkey took place, began. So where 1 million, 1.5 million Christians have been killed in Turkey. So, and this was somehow the beginning of the end of Christianity in some areas. Now, the question is, how many Christians will remain in the Middle East? Probably not many. Probably not many. But those who will remain will be very motivated. And there are probably some areas where the Christians can continue to live, and we should work for giving the possibility to live, to the Christians to live in this area. This is mainly Lebanon, and this is mainly Kurdistan. Two main regions where the Christians should continue to live, and partially in the rest of Syria, in the last part of Syria, which will remain. And plus, there will be the Christians in Egypt. Egypt will continue to be, there will continue to be a stronger Christian presence. So I think we should see that the Christians will be a minority, even stronger minority than before. But we have to support very much these Christians to be motivated and to give them the possibility to stay. Regarding Europe, I'm not pessimistic about Christianity in Europe, not at all. Obviously, it depends on us. I mean, if Christianity will exist in Europe or not in future, it depends on us. I mean, if the Christians will give witness or not. I mean, but I'm not pessimistic. I'm quite optimistic because I see that Christianity in Europe is maybe a minority, but is quite a creative minority, which gives us a great hope. But it depends on each one of us if there will be a future of Christianity in Europe.
I think that's a very hopeful and optimistic and motivating end of our session. I'd love to thank you for your thoughts, and thank you all very much for coming, and I suppose I'll leave it to you now. If we could thank with a
Once again, thank you very much that you met with us tonight and shared your time with us. Ďakujem aj vám za to, že ste dnes si vyhradili čas pre bratislavské Hamsové dni.